Hello, my friends. After a super valuable conversation on the Handpan pages on Facebook, talking to both makers and to players, both professional and amateur, I compiled some of the components that you came up with and some of my own thoughts that help us determine what a quality instrument is. And I think we can really benefit from a non-emotional approach to measuring quality. Obviously, some of choosing a handpan is just preference, and I might like a sound that you don't like, and you may like a sound that I don't like, but we can measure a couple components that really allow us to focus on what is preference versus what is quality. So we're going to look at a handful of concepts that will allow you to make a decision and to evaluate quality handpans without the emotion of where it's from, what scale is it, etc. So let's take a look at this list. So obviously this is just a list to get us started. Your opinions may vary, but this is good for starting that conversation, and then we can further refine our categories when we comment down below in both my YouTube video and the Facebook video. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts there. Okay, so the standards we're going to be talking about today really apply to every single instrument. And obviously the standards of modern instruments are different than the standards of instruments from the past. So if I was applying this same rubric to some of my older antique instruments like a Hong or some of the old Pantheon steels we have in the shop, they may or may not have some of the current standards of quality present in them. And that's okay. You may not hit all of these categories in an instrument that you're looking at. This is more to give you a little more confidence when you're choosing an instrument that it will be sufficient for your playing, it's going to keep you interested, and it's going to last and not come out of tune immediately. So one of the components that's really important just off the bat is it in tune? And for some instruments, that may mean that it's dead on. It's exactly on A. It's exactly on B flat, and all of the harmonics are exactly on their position as well, the fifth and the octave. This, however, is not always true. So if you were someone that watched tuning videos, I think there's a great video by Sean Beaver and some other players as well and makers talking about how to keep notes in tune but well blended. Sometimes for an instrument to sound blended and even, the notes are maybe 2 cents flat or 2 cents sharp. Sometimes B flat sounds a little bit lower, or sounds better, a little bit lower versus higher and in tune. So there's going to be these little components above and below the perfectly in tune line for instruments, but we have a sense that if it's off by 5 to 10 cents, it's going to be considered out of tune. So you can really easily check this first by ear. Does it sound out of tune in the video, or does it sound out of tune in person? Once you get past that check, if you have a good ear as well, you can take a look at a chromatic tuner. This is something that I don't really recommend. A guitar tuner would work as well, because you're going to get the octave, the fundamental, and the fifth. So it's going to confuse that tuner. Something like a strobe tuner or linotune is going to give you a better sense of fundamental, octave, and fifth, and you'll be able to be given a visual of that. So I wanted to show you just really quick. This is just an app called Precision Strobe Tuner. You could use one of the many strobe tuners online if you want to dive this deep into it. So when I hit a note on this is a sunpan, so there's only the octave, there's no fifth on a sunpan. When we play this, you'll see on my strobe tuner, this is an A center. And you can see there's 2 notes on this one. There's the fundamental A, and then there's the octave of A. On a typical handpan, we're going to have 3 nodes that are going to go off at the same time. So this is an F2 pygmy that's actually available in our shop right now. So if you do the same thing with this, you can see this has 2 on the F position and 1 on the C position. So the C is the 5th, the 2 Fs are the octave and the fundamental. This is something that you don't need to do if you're picking an instrument, but your tuner or the person selling it for you really should have an idea of how in tune the instrument is and how blended it is. If you're buying a handpan that's not in tune, you're already starting at a disadvantage, unless you are friends with tuners like I am and can get it retuned without much hassle. So that's number 1, is it in tune? Next up is really easy to test. Is it blended well, or is there evenness in the sound? A handpan that's most desirable for the general public will be balanced. So if I'm developed enough, even as a new player, that I can hit every note with about the same strength and the same finger, I can get a sense of whether one note responds more than another, or one note is a little bit louder, or it blares, or the 5th is louder. And this is a test you can have someone do if they're selling it to you. Walk around with the same finger, either thumbs or pointer fingers, and play the notes. This is an IASA D Curd 10. This is a very well blended instrument. It's very balanced. All of the notes kind of have the same feel. And none of them shoot above the other ones in terms of volume or sustain or harmonics. Some handpans will do this, and this is a tuning style for some makers. They maybe have a really strong ding and they have a quieter tone fields on the outside. It's kind of a player and a maker preference, but as long as you can control this aspect, you really can play any instrument and not struggle. But newer players are going to want an instrument that has a really good balance and is not going to give you a lot of variations. The more advanced you become, the better you can make even a really bad handpan sound playable. But in the beginning, when you're still developing your strikes, you obviously want an instrument that has most of that built into it, so you don't have to modify your strike every time. All right, so here's an example of an instrument that has a really strong center note. And I like this about sunpans. It's harder for other people to control this. You can hear there's a punchiness to the center note, and then the side notes are a little bit quieter. For percussive players, for meditative players, this really works well, and people don't struggle with it, but it's more if notes have a higher volume on the octave or 5th or something, and that area, it can be a little more of a struggle for people to play. But this is an example of the ding being very prominent and the side notes being a little more controlled. So another thought is listening for blaring notes. And sometimes people call it screaming 5ths as well, and that could be a different type of blaring. It's a different mechanism. But when you're playing this instrument, you're hearing someone demo a handpan, if you hit a note and you hear this warble, it kind of sounds almost like a pitch bend, like if I was going when you're striking the note itself. That could mean that it blares easily. I personally like instruments that when I push them and they're stable enough, they start to warble at a high tuning. So like higher notes, when you really hit them hard, you can get this little bit of bleeding or warbling. But for new players or players who just want very consistent instruments, blaring is kind of an issue for those that haven't adapted their playing style yet. So this handpan is a great instrument. It's my personal Terrapan. But this one wants a very particular type of strike. It's not flexible in how you play it. So if I hit this bottom note, the 1, quite, normal strength, it's fine. I'm controlling my thumb. If I hit it a little harder, you hear that it's sort of like a warble sound. Same with the 2. That note, although not a problem, is going to be a little trickier for new players, because you might be playing, you're like, something doesn't sound right when I'm playing, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And oftentimes it's simply that you have to have more control when striking that note. So listening for blaring on an instrument is a really important thing if you're trying to choose an easy to play instrument. So here's an example of a very high quality instrument that was more of a prototype that has a little bit of blare on the lowest note. It makes this instrument just as high quality as anything else, but for a newer player, you might wonder, why is this sound different? What is this sound? So listen to it quietly. Okay, and I'm going to increase the volume. That's okay. One more time. Can you hear that on the 1? I'm not even hitting very hard with my thumb. Sounds like it's like fighting against itself. It has to do with the way the note is vibrating. And it's just something to be aware of. So along with listening for whether it's in tune, listening for how it's blended, listening to make sure that none of the notes blare easily when you're striking just with a normal strike, it's going to help you choose an instrument that is a better suited instrument for you. So another thing you'd be thinking about is crosstalk. And crosstalk is negative interaction between notes on an instrument. There could be notes next to each other, or there could be notes that are across the scale. When we have notes that react positively together, they couple and they will cause the other one to resonate, and they happen to be in the same octave or fifth. We call that sympathetic resonance. Some people like that. I like it. Other people don't. And in the case of this particular hung, because this has a B flat in it, there's a little bit of tension between the sound of this, the size of the shell, the port, and you can hear that a note is almost canceling out another note when you play. Can you hear how the 2, the B flat is a little more diminished? These types of interactions are very common, even on really high quality instruments. It happens sometimes. And it's, again, not a ruling it out sort of thing, but something to be aware of is you could ask the seller or listen for yourself, does it have crosstalk? What 2 notes activate each other? And is it a positive or a negative thing? I'm going to show you an example of positive sympathetic resonance right now. This is called bloom. All right, so in this case, I like the sound of this interaction. When I hit the ding, it causes the octave and the fifth to ring out. Again, for percussive players, sometimes you don't like that interaction, but it's something that you can control by where you strike, whether you're muting the ding as you're striking it, and also just your proximity of strike as well. So it's not a bad thing. I like it. Again, some players don't like it. They don't want a more controlled instrument. A really good example of a wide open instrument, sonido da mano handpans are very open. So I would not say the notes are closed into themselves. There's an openness to the sound. Whereas some ayasa have a little bit more of a closed ecosystem where each note is its own entity. And although there's interaction with the other ones, they almost feel like they're on their own island of sound when you're playing them. Some of this has to do with the style of tuning, soft border tuning versus sort of harder borders, and that just means that the tone fields themselves have visible transition lines from the tone field to the body. A sunpan is a great example of an instrument with soft borders, or Sebastian at Luna tunes soft border instruments, and also the later hongs have very soft borders. This isn't a good or bad thing, but it tends to lead instruments to sounding a little bit more open if they have soft borders, and a little more closed in if they have harder borders and have had a lot of work done around the interstitial area of the notes. So another component is harmonics. And on some instruments like the sunpan, you only have one harmonic. This doesn't mean it's a bad or a good instrument, but it does mean that when you go to mute it, you only have one other pitch aside from the fundamental. So if this is an A in the center, the harmonic is an A. On an instrument that has two, you want to make sure that they sound in tune with themselves. And this will help if you're using a strobe tuner. You're going to be able to see where the octave and fifth are, and that shouldn't be much of a problem. If you're doing it by ear, you can test by playing both sides of the octave. So if I was, again, using this ayasa, I would either have the seller, or myself, I would doing long and short way. Check if they're in tune. If a harmonic is out of tune, it's going to make the note sound kind of strange, even if the fundamental is in tune. And they slip over time, but it could mean it was damaged, or it could mean it's not a great quality instrument. One of the critiques of a lot of the cheaper Chinese instruments is that they don't have the upper harmonics tuned, or they're kind of off. So that's an important factor to listen for. So another fun component to choosing a quality instrument and kind of finding the right characteristics for your playing is seeing if the body is tuned. And for some instruments, it means just the shoulders. For other instruments, it means the shoulders and also the port or the goo. For the goo, it doesn't make that much of a difference unless you're going to be a sideways player and you want to play the instrument like this. That no one really does that anymore, but I think it should come back. But for me, shoulders make a lot more of a difference than whether the port's tuned. The shoulders lend themselves to creating a more stable sounding instrument, especially if it's a lower handpan. So a great example of that is this F pygmy. And this instrument is actually for sale on my mysticinstruments.com site. Because this is so low, when you play the center note, I usually on low instruments that aren't my own will use my hand to mute some of the shoulder. On this instrument, I really like the shoulder. So as I'm playing it, I don't need to be worried about having my hand at the right angle. For me, it makes a big difference in cleanliness, and it's always a plus if they're tuned. The goo or port doesn't matter quite as much, but it's a nice feature for instruments. So the final thought here is sustain and volume. An instrument with longer sustain is going to fill out the time when you're not playing it. And for meditative players, for melodic players, and people that want to write music, having longer sustain allows them to not play as much and still fill all of that space. And I can give you an interesting example of that. If I was playing the same song essentially on this is an ayasa D chord. On this, there's a lot more room for me to go slow. If I was playing that same song on a chord that was nitrided, or in this case this is an integral, but almost the chord. Because of the quick cutoff in sound, I have to be mindful of how I fill that space and how I move my body in relationship to that. All right, my friends, thank you for joining me for this characteristic of quality handpan video. Starting this coming week on mysticinstruments.com, I'm going to be having a rubric present on all of the scales that's going to talk about sustain, volume, tuning, obviously material, is the port and are the shoulders tuned. These sorts of components are really useful for helping to figure out if an instrument is going to be a good fit for you. Again, if it doesn't have one or some of these qualities, it doesn't mean it's a bad handpan. It just may require a little more thought when you're playing it. And for an advanced player like myself and other people, that might be fine. And a lot of times older instruments kind of fit into a different category than modern ones. In general, our taste has shifted from very dry ceramic and short sustain to much warmer and woody, not as metallic, not as ceramic, and long sustain. And I have love for both styles, but I find for newer players, they often feel like on a short sustain instrument, they're not able to play to their potential, and it really has to do with not having the notes linger as long. It's funny actually, if you go from playing nitrided to playing stainless, it's a pretty stark contrast in sound. And I really recommend, if you have the chance to play a chord in stainless and a chord in nitrided, that's a really great way of figuring out kind of how the flavor and timbre is different between the two. Again, the most important component in all of this is how you feel about the handpan. So once you have the measurable traits figured out, it's in tune, it has this long sustain, it has this material, figuring that part out is the easy part. How does it make you feel is a whole nother category. And I think for a lot of players, either not writing material and just improvising all the time, or picking a scale that doesn't match sort of their emotion, it makes it harder for them to learn. So it's worth, once you figure out the sort of non-emotional characteristics that make your handpan interesting that you want to buy, listening for how it makes you feel and sort of what options you have while playing it. That's another whole mechanism for choosing. So hope this was useful to any new players, and if you have any thoughts of your own and you want to add on to this list, I want to go in depth more with each of these components, but I just want to throw this out there as a compilation of your thoughts. So hope you guys are well, and I will talk to you next time.